how you look at the Philadelphia Flyers depends whether you're a glass half empty or glass half full kind of guy. I'm a glass half full kind of guy, but the Flyers have this weird pattern where they make the playoffs, miss the playoffs, make the playoffs, miss the playoffs. Made the playoffs this year, did pretty well, which would indicate they might miss the playoffs next year. I don't think they do. I think this is more sustainable than the other teams that then fell out of the playoffs the year after. But it's the Metro, and the Metro is very competitive. Now, of course, they lost round 2 in 7 against the New York Islanders. Hard-fought series, defensive series. A lot of defensive hockey employed by Alain Vigneault in that series, and he's still behind the bench, of course, for Philadelphia, and their GM's Chuck Fletcher. Now, Philadelphia, they're interesting because it feels like there's the veterans, there's the young kids, and I could kind of understand if you're a fan of the team and you're like, maybe it's time to move a veteran out. Move a veteran out, save some cap space because things could get ugly for this team after. And there's something to that, I think. I think the JVR contract stands out as one that maybe they're going to try to get out of in this offseason just because of the future and trying to keep this team together. So their top 6, Claude Giroux, who's 32 years of age, it feels like he's older than that. It does. It feels like he's older than that. Couturier down the middle. Voracek, 31 years of age. It also feels like Voracek's older than 31. Lindblom, Hayes, and Konechny. Now, of course, Oscar Lindblom did come back at the end. Was not 100%, of course. Takes a long time to get to game shape and get back to where he was. But it's a very solid top 6. Kevin Hayes, that contract when it was signed looked very expensive. It still does. But he lived up to it. Year 1, he absolutely lived up to it. He was fantastic. And Hayes was the one forward that the Flyers always seemed to have going. So if the other 11 forwards were passengers that night, Hayes was not. And so Hayes, and I'm talking about in the playoffs here, Hayes was their best player in those playoffs. Although I will defer as well to Carter Hart, and I think Provorov was pretty solid as well. Now, also, top 6 guys who might be able to fill in. Joe Farabee showed in the playoffs. He's got some top 6 potential, definitely. And Frost is going to get some looks here and there in top 6 roles, depending on injuries and whatnot in the upcoming season. The question becomes Nolan Patrick. Now, Nolan Patrick's a restricted free agent this offseason. He's obviously not going to get a raise or anything. I'm not sure how Philadelphia handles this. I'm not sure when, if Nolan Patrick comes back at this point. He's been out for so long. You have to ask that question of, so will he come back? And then if he does, what kind of player are we going to be looking at when he comes back? Does he ever have any hope of reaching the potential that he was seen to have when they drafted him at 3 years ago? And yeah, it's only been 3 years. And so Nolan Patrick's still very young. If he can come back and if he can rediscover his scoring touch, he absolutely pushes his way into the top 6 somehow, some way. Or he ends up being one of the best third liners in the NHL. Again, it's if he reaches that potential and if he comes back and plays. But that's the great question mark on this team. Is Nolan Patrick, their star draft pick in 2017, that just has never really had that chance to develop. He hasn't been healthy, and I still like the kid, but he's got to play. Now on the blue line, their top 4, you've got Provorov, you've got Niskanen. Niskanen's 33 years of age. That feels about right with Niskanen. Sanheim and Myers. So, part of the reason I put the numbers up there for the age of these guys is because there's two identities, I think, with the Flyers, and I think some of the veteran players are going to be taking some heat in the offseason. I look at Giroux as a guy who's going to take a lot of heat, and Van Riemsdyk. And I can understand it. But the big question on their blue line, what do you do with Ghost? Gostisbehere has gone from one of the best offensive defensemen in the league to an enigma, and he's sometimes in the lineup, sometimes not. And clearly, Alain Vigneault has no confidence in the game of Gostisbehere. To when they need offense, he still says, I don't like the defense. Clearly, this has to be an issue with defense for Gostisbehere that's keeping him out of the lineup for Vigneault. It's possible a team looks at Gostisbehere and says, yeah, we like him, but his $4.5 million price tag till 2023, and the fact you guys aren't playing him tells us you're going to have to retain some salary. And so I do think this needs to change. I think Gostisbehere needs to be traded. I think he needs to find a city, a team that'll do well by him. I look at last night's result in Vegas and I think, you know what? Ghost might be a good addition to their blue line because he can score points. The defense is a little bit suspect, but he can get points, he can get goals. And while I love Nate Schmidt, he doesn't have that offensive oomph that you need on that blue line that, say, Shea Theodore has right now. So, Ghost, I think, if they handle it right, could very well get moved. Top two goaltenders, this is where things get interesting too. So Elliott's a UFA. They may bring Elliott back, but if they didn't, right now the top two on the depth chart would be Hart, who's 22 years of age, and Ustimenko, who's 21. So that tells you that nope, that's not going to happen. It's not going to go that way. I would look for them to bring in another backup. But Carter Hart showed this year he's ready. He's a starter. He's ready. It's done. No more worries about goaltending for Philly. And at age 22, that means for the next 10 years, their goaltending should be set. This should be Flyers, Carter Hart, Flyers, Carter Hart, and that should be inseparable for at least the next decade. With the Flyers, you just never know, especially when it comes to goaltenders. There's been situations where they've had guys under long-term contracts and it just doesn't work. And goaltenders have come in and they've looked great and then it doesn't work. So I don't want to put cart before the horse, but Hart this year looked pretty good and I think the Flyers are in good shape. They have $8.91 million in cap space, but they don't have money to go out and sign anybody unless they can get rid of another contract off their lineup. So their UFAs for this year, Tyler Pitlick, I do expect them to try to keep him. And I wish Dallas had tried to keep him, to be honest. I like Pitlick. He's a good, solid bottom six option, and I like the guy a lot. Grant, I talked about Grant in a video a couple days ago. I like Derek Grant. I think he probably ends up back with the Ducks. That does seem like the one that makes the most sense, right? Grant struggled in his time in Philadelphia, but he's been good for the Ducks, and we'll see if he ends up back there. Nate Thompson, older, I think he's 35. Thompson, it kind of worked with Philly. In some games, he looked pretty good. I saw articles as well. Oh, Grant Thompson needs to come out of the lineup. This isn't working. And then he'd have a good game the next night. So, kind of a mixed bag. I would not be surprised to see him get a one-year contract in the offseason. I wouldn't be surprised to see the team down the street, Vancouver, take a shot at a guy like Nate Thompson. But then they'll give him like $8 million a year or something and try to tell us, this is the plan. Oh, I need a drink. So, I don't drink. So, Nate Thompson, we'll see what happens with him. Justin Braun. Braun was good for Philadelphia, but I don't know what his contract demands are going to be and whether or not that's going to be out of line with the amount of cap space that the Flyers have currently. Cap space is going to be an issue with improving this team. If this team's going to improve, it's probably going to have to be from within. They're going to have to rely on a guy like Frost, Farabee, Lindblom being healthy, and Patrick coming back. They're going to have to rely on a lot of internal things to go their way in order to get better. And Brian Elliott. And if Elliott wants to come back, one-year deal, no problem, probably cost a couple of million. And then that would leave him, let's say it's a $2 million deal, it would be a $6.91 million in cap space they have left. Restricted free agents, Obey Kubel, impressed with that guy's work ethic. Hard worker, Obey Kubel, you hear his name a lot when he's on the ice. And Myers is definitely going to get a raise over what he made this season. And he deserves it. He's been a pretty solid option for the Flyers. Flyers fans complained a lot when he wasn't getting ice time, and now he is. So it proves Flyers fans were right on that one. And Haig, a bottom two defenseman, won't cost them a ton of money. But again, when you factor all this in, that $8.91 million in cap space, most of that's going to get eaten up by guys who are either restricted free agents right now or trying to bring back a UFA or two that's out there. And then next year's the big year. Carter Hart, next year is a restricted free agent. And does he end up getting Carey Price type money? If Carter Hart has next year like a Vezina type season, can you argue against giving him $9 million a year? Does somebody offer sheet him? Does a team that's looking and saying, you know what, we need a goalie and these guys have cap it, yeah, we'll throw an offer sheet at him. And where the money gets interesting for Philadelphia is, so you've got Giroux, who's 32 years of age. In their last 2 playoffs, they've played 22 games. Claude Giroux has 2 goals in those 22 games. And he makes $8.28 million for the next 2 years. So the question becomes this. His points totals were fantastic 2 years ago. They dropped a bit last year, and this year they dropped further. In all likelihood, he's not going to get back to that 100-point season. So at what point do the Flyers start having this conversation about changing their identity, changing the lines around? Maybe Giroux plays less of a role, a less prominent role anyways. Voracek at $8.25 million for 4 more years. That hurts a little bit in that that's a lot of money. Voracek was good in the playoffs. He had a slow start to the season, well, miserable start to the season. But again, neither Giroux nor Voracek are necessarily old. So that's why I've got their age on the board. But you do have to ask yourself, are we looking at a team that has to change things up? Do you want to give Konechny and Hayes and a guy like Lindblom more opportunity and maybe cut back a little bit with Voracek and Giroux? Maybe then they're fresher when it comes to a playoff run, especially in Giroux's case, right? And then you look and you go, well, yeah, but they had 6 months off. And I go, yeah, good point. JVR, arguing with myself, new heights. JVR was very prominent in how much people agree that his contract looks bad right now. He's 31 years of age. JVR also not as old as people might think he is. 12 games in the playoffs. He had 2 goals. And his contract's for $7 million for 3 more years. That's the contract that I would think. And I think there's a buyout candidate there, which hurts. Because if you buy out a contract that has 3 years left, that means you're paying that penalty for 6. So that's where it gets tough. And when you look at the current economical situation, economic situation, and you look at where the cap's going to be for the next likely 3 years, where it's going to be flat. That $7 million really stands out, and so we'll see if they do something to try to get that out of there. And again, Ghost at $4.5 million till 2023. I think there's some work to be done here by Chuck Fletcher. The Flyers are still, in my eyes, one of the better teams in the Metro. But the Metro is so tight, so competitive. And 1 through 8 in the Metro are going to be pretty solid again next year. I believe, anyways. We'll see. I think New Jersey's going to get better next year. You look at the number of first-round draft picks they have this year, and if 2 of them are a hit, they're in good shape. And at least one of them should push their way into likely a roster spot next year. So I don't think you can take any team in the Metro for granted. So it is hard to project how solid this team might be, how far they could go. But I know there were a lot of people that weren't impressed with their win over Montreal, and then were less impressed with their game against the Islanders. It's not a flashy style of hockey. It's not always pretty when they win. But they still did make it to that second round, lost to the Islanders, and in my eyes, they're still one of those teams to watch. I still think this is a team that, they haven't won a Stanley Cup since the mid-'70s, and I think they're due. But we'll see. There's some work to be done, like I said, by Chuck Fletcher. Let me know your thoughts regarding what needs to be done in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. And yes, this is a Bobby Clark jersey. Thank you guys so much. I will talk to you soon.